Okay, everyone, a big Shabbat Shalom to all of you who are watching here today on the live stream, but also to all of you who are scattered across the earth and watching this after the fact. We wish you not only a big Shabbat Shalom, but a big welcome. Welcome to the river, as we affectionately call it. And if you are watching after the fact and you do wish to come and join us live and be part of the wider community and part of the wider live streams, we do meet every weekly Shabbat at 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. And if you want to know how to come join us, just go to the riverbranchfellowship.com website. Scroll down a bit on the homepage and there'll be a link to sign up to the weekly newsletter. When you click on that, this little box will come up and just put in your first and last name and email and hit subscribe. And every Friday, you'll get the weekly newsletter. And within that newsletter, not only will you get the community updates, but you'll get the Zoom login details for the live stream. And so come join us. Come say hi. We'd be more than happy to have you and come and join us. Okay, we're going to start a series, one that Curtis and I actually had the honor of giving at the appointed time of Sukkot. And we're going to start this series on the fear of Elohim. It will be a 3-part series. And the fear of Elohim is a topic that we think we know. Many people will understand that there's a nuance in the word fear regarding, abject terror, and that contrasted with the reverence of our Creator. But this is a topic that, as Curtis and I were really delving deep on this in the lead up to the appointed times, there's so many things that we think we know, and we think we have a particular topic or view of thinking or a scripture down to a T. And then the Father has this way of getting us to revisit what we thought we once knew. And actually, what then happens is that His Spirit uncovers a richness and a depth that we'd never seen before. And so Curtis and I believe it is so with the fear of Elohim. So much so that we've come to the conclusion that the fear of Elohim, not only is it a quintessential part of our faith, but it's actually one of the big pillars and foundations of this whole plan of redemption and part of the love based on a covenant between a groom and his bride. What say you, Curtis? I've got the donkey here joining me for this series. We always look forward to doing the Sukkot teaching in a format that's presentable for the live stream. But how are you doing, brother?
Yeah, good. Yeah, it was quite an honor being able to, present the series and, be with everyone during Sukkot. This is a little bit of a different feel. Because it's kind of it's a series in itself, but we decided that we would do this during Sukkot because, again, the misunderstanding, the fear of God, and what is this fear of Elohim? Do we really understand this as a foundational block in the great plan of redemption? Many of us don't tend to, especially in a Western context. Because fear we think of as being just scared or afraid or that sort of a thing. And indeed, there is a place for that. The great sort of start of the journey of the house of Israel actually had a foundation that includes this whole journey of what truly the fear of Elohim is and its different sort of stages and progressions and the need for us to have this, and its link into a bridal governance context, and also for the whole journey of the faith. We both, in putting the series together, it's a sobering reminder that we as a body, we either have a misunderstanding of this or we don't have it in its right place, or maybe even sometimes at all. And a lot of the behavior that we see go on in the wider body of Messiah and the various movements and denominations and everything else, a lot of it actually can be attributed to not actually having a proper fear of Elohim and its understanding. And so this is a big one in this sense for us to sort of revisit and reset this and get a proper and healthy and balanced understanding of what this actually is and the need for it as a part of the great plan of redemption for his house, and indeed the restoration of the house, and of course his plan with how he intends to administer his house. So yeah, we embark on the fear of Elohim, Michael.
We do. And just to kick really the series off, what does he mean? We've got this written in Psalm 34:11. Come, O children, listen to me. I will teach you the fear of Yah. And so there's this wonderful statement that anyone that claims to be part of the faith, to be part of the house of Israel, we're being told here that part of our journey will involve learning about what the fear of Yah is. And again, if this is such a quintessential part of this faith and of this plan of redemption, what is the fear of Yah? Is it just the terror of him, being afraid of him? Some of you, as I said earlier, may even understand that, well, actually, no, I need to revere him. Well, what does that even really mean? And who here has found that, you know, you think you know the meanings of certain words, and then again, the Spirit just opens up the depth and you realize that this word means so much more. And so we believe it is with the fear of Yah. But we're being told point blank here, we need to learn what this fear of Yah is.
And not only to learn it as such, but it's the actual reference here, and what King David is saying in the Psalms is that we're starting off in this childlike state. Oh, children, you know, we're referenced in this time in the early journey of understanding the faith as sheep and children, and these analogies of that which can scatter or scare easily. And yet there seems to be, if we don't have the right understanding of this, I will teach you the fear of Yah. And what that is actually expressing and what it's meaning is that in this learning, that there's an actual intention, a direct intentional aspect that the Father is actually saying to us, I'm going to teach you this. I don't want the world to teach you this. I don't want you to just experience, being scared and afraid. I'm going to actually teach you something, and it has a great and eternal purpose for it. And if this is missing, again, out of the faith journey, sometimes we can see a lot of bad behavior happen in the body, and especially as children of the faith, where we're not actually understanding this in its proper context and in its and in a healthy sense. And in a way, we actually see lots of stuff that goes on within the believing body that actually shouldn't. And we actually believe that it's directly related to this part has been missing a lot from the body, the teach this fear of Yah. So we're going to set out to do that a little bit in this, and to honor this this captured in the Psalm here in 34:11, to be a part of that, because he is intending to teach us all. What is the fear of Yah? What does this really mean?
And one of the things with the idea of teaching in a Western mindset, especially in a Greco-Roman mindset, the idea of being taught something has been limited to a classroom environment. And unfortunately, that mentality is alive and well within the Western body of Messiah. And so generally from a Western mindset, we think, oh, well, I'll learn about it. I'll do my word studies on it. I'll do the theory side of it. I now know it. But those of you who have been looking deeper at your faith will actually start to appreciate that the biblical Hebraic way of being taught something involved what we would call discipleship. Someone that's gone before us in a particular avenue and is there to show us, to guide us. You know, as Paul would say, imitate me as I imitate Messiah. Like, yes, there is a point of classroom environment, if you want to call it that, but that's just the beginning. The Shema is hear and do. And so what Curtis and I are hoping to do is maybe kick off the hearing part, but the doing part, we can't do this for you. And something like the fear of Yah, as we're going to see, is a journey, one that we need to grow in, one that we need to act in, okay? The fear of Yah is not just a mental assent. I understand something. You're going to hear it. And moving forward, we need to start doing it. And this is what's unfortunately missing, as Curtis was saying, in most portions of the body. People are not doing the fear of Yah. It's not become living in their life. It's just ink on a page.
The bold statement at the beginning of this series, for all of us to really consider and to put this out right at the beginning, and we'll take this through the series, is he describes himself as love. And many of us do not associate the fear of Yah with the love of Yah. And yet it is actually a foundational block to actually being able to love and be loved. And so this is a very, very important piece that we wanted to get across to the wider community at this time. So the bold statement is, who would have thought, Michael, that understanding the fear of Yah is a fundamental principle to actually being able to love him. And so this is a very interesting aspect and angle which we're going to look at.
Okay. So what is the fear of Elohim? We've made these bold statements. Let's start defining what the fear of Elohim is. In the English definition of fear, and within it, you know, there is a little bit of a wink at reverence, but fear is generally understood as an unpleasant emotion caused by the belief that someone or something is dangerous, likely to cause pain, or a threat. Fear is actually, in the English sense, is an emotional-based thing, a feeling of anxiety concerning the outcome of something or the safety and well-being of someone, a mixed feeling of dread, and in some cases, reverence. But reverence associated with fear seems to be more, with at least within the English speaking world, more of a 100 years ago type of thing. It's something that in the modern context, fear is just that. It's dread, it's terror, it's anxiety, something that's relegated to the emotional state. And the problem is when those emotions actually start to drive our decision-making process. And so if we left the fear of Elohim to just this, I would argue that it's actually moving away very much from the biblical thing, or at least leaving you with a very childlike understanding of what the fear of Elohim is. Now, we can see that reverence is somewhat interconnected with this. And reverence, again, from an English definition, is, you know, this deep respect for someone or something, honor or respect felt or shown, or how we regard something, how we treat something. But again, because by and large, in the Western world, we live in a godless society that has no understanding of honor and shame. We actually don't really know what reverence really means, especially as we're so far removed from the idea of having a king or a ruler over us, or as in the case of the House of Israel, a theocracy where Elohim is king. We're so far removed in our, you know, modern Western Greco-Roman constructs of modern society that we don't even really know what reverence is, let alone know how to act in a reverent way.
One of the things with all of this is that to understand fear, the way that he's wanting us to, we won't understand its usage throughout Scripture. Again, the English, very challenging right throughout Scripture on this, and where we see fear right throughout the Tanakh, in many places within the Torah, and then, of course, within the Testament. If we don't get this right, we don't actually know the context in which we're actually seeing something, because we just keep applying this Western mindset to it. And, if we, for instance, if I made the statement, in order to love one another, we need to learn to fear one another, that would not make sense in a Western mindset context. What do you mean? I should fear my brother Michael? If I bring just a Western understanding to that, it won't make sense. But if we get the true biblical understanding and the Creator's way of wanting us to understand this, it not only makes absolute sense, it necessitates us actually understanding this. And so it's a necessity to the very foundation of our faith. If you go into the Greek here.
Oh, the Hebrew.
We got the Hebrew. The Yare. Well, this is interesting.
With the Hebrew, it's probably best to actually start from the bottom up, because it's easier to process in this way. So we have this word at the bottom, chatat. This is basically abject terror, absolute terror of something, to be shattered, to be dismayed, to be broken. This is the highest level of fear, terror, being afraid in that kind of sense. Now, moving one up from there, the pachad is actually alarm. So think abject terror and then bring it down a level in terms of intensity. Pachad kind of covers fear, alarm, but it's not abject terror. And as we're going to see, that pachad is usually when you hear of something and it shocks you to the core, but it doesn't bring you to this place of abject terror where you're absolutely petrified, quivering out of your wits. Now, when you move up, Yare and Yira, you want to think of these as they're covering the same thing. The Yare, the word at the top, is the verbal form, to fear, to revere, to be afraid. Now, the Hebrew has one word that encompasses all aspects of the meaning of what we would consider fear. So while it can involve to be afraid, to be in terror, it can also mean to be in awe of, to be awed, to reverence, to honor, to respect, to inspire reverence or godly fear and awe. And so in Hebrew, you have Yare that encompasses every aspect of what fear is, and it will be the context of the wider passage that will define which side of the coin, so to speak, we're looking at. Are we looking at terror, being afraid, or are we looking at godly awe? And then from Yare, the verbal form, you get the noun form, the fear, the terror, the object causing fear, the fear of Elohim, but also, again, just like the word Yare, the reverence. Because you fear something, piety is an outcome. If you fear Elohim, it should change the way that you act. It should change the way that you go about your everyday life. Now, what's really interesting is that when you take the verbal form and put it in the noun form, it becomes a feminine noun. And this becomes yira. It's just interesting, especially when you plug that within the great plan of redemption and in a marriage covenant lens of a groom and his bride. I just find that like a neat little thing within the Hebrew grammar. Now, this is the Hebrew, and we're going to look at the Greek. And Curtis, I'll let you explain the Greek, but what's really interesting with the Greek, we often say that, the Greek isn't as good as the Hebrew. In this particular case, what's really interesting with the Greek is that it will take remember what I said about the word yareh in Hebrew, and that it encompasses every aspect of fear. Well, what the Greek does, it actually takes each one of those different aspects and ascribes a different word to it. So where in the Hebrew you would have one word, the Greek will have a separate word for each aspect. And here we've got 4 words in the Greek.
Yeah. In the Hebrew, and people may be surprised to find it in the Yareh, is its usage is generally denoting actually to honor and reverence and respect. And so unless that context in the wider passage isn't understood, it becomes a little bit more difficult. What the Greek does, as Michael had mentioned, is that it gives us a little bit more of a hint, because often when we're reading in the Brit, they're referencing the passages of the Torah and the prophets. And so it's an interesting thing. They've established most definitely in a number of the passages how we were supposed to view that usage. So it's even giving us the context of the passage through what was done with the words of Messiah and the disciples and the Apostle Paul. And it can teach us to sort of how are we to understand the context, and what does it lean to when the Hebrew encompasses or uses Yareh. The phobos is generally how we look at fear in a Western context. So most of us just have this dread, this terror, this striking of terror. Being afraid is phobos. So this phobos state, and that's generally, I would say, 99.9% of people in the West, that's what fear means. But the Greek is breaking it down. You got the Eusebeia here, and it actually starts to go, no, this is more going into reverence and what that's about. And so we want to know, because this links into the great plan of redemption. When we use that, the semnots here is this characteristic that's given to, or it's someone who can receive or should be receiving the respect, the dignity, and the honor associated to it. And then you've got the prosioneo. And again, this is actually giving that to another. And so what is interesting when we encapsulate it all is that the Greek gives us some insight here in how they were understanding the context of much of what we see actually in the Torah and the prophets. So as we go through this, and in both the Brit and in the Torah and the prophets, this is where we can start to get a greater understanding of, okay, is this just phobos, Michael? Am I just to be, freaked out and terrified? Yet, it also teaches us that, no, there is actually a place for phobos. And the actual traditional Western understanding is actually a part of something he's wanting us to know and to understand and to teach and to build upon something or a journey into what or where he's taking us. And this indeed fits in to Love Perfected, which we'll go on to. So if we just stay in phobos, we're going to get in a little bit of trouble. And he wants to teach us almost in a sense beyond phobos. But if we just stay in our Western mindset, we'll get a few things out of context here. So that'll be a little bit of the journey and the challenge, but there's a deepness and a richness that now we can unpack and uncover as we reflect on certain matters and certain parts of Scripture and how that relates and how we're supposed to understand it.
And just before we go on further, just to give, again, because most of us here are English speakers, understand that phobos, this is where we get the word phobia from. If you have a phobia of something, this abject terror that is quite often out of kilter. But what I really want to highlight is this Eusebeia and semnotes, that what the Greek is trying to get at is when we understand someone who is reverent, we think that, oh, what they're doing, because of what they're doing, we need to give reverence to them. And while that is one aspect of it, as we're going to see, the way that the biblical authors actually used this word was that because an individual feared Yah, and because they had a healthy understanding of the fear of Elohim, that is what actually changed their character. And so Eusebeia and Semnotes actually have more this nuance that because someone fears Elohim, therefore their conduct and their deeds and their attitudes are in line with the fear of Elohim. It's a nuance that you wouldn't even get from just reading the dictionary definition. And we're going to see this, especially in this first part, in some of the passages, that it's not that the person is driving the fear of Elohim. It's because of the fear of Elohim, their character is different. And this is an important nuance to understand, especially when we look at these words, because Eusebeia, for example, is very often translated in English as either reverence or godliness. If you have like a King James or even maybe an ESV version, whenever you see the word godliness in the Brit Hadashah, in the so-called New Testament, it's this word here. And so again, in the English Western mindset, we think godliness. Well, what does that mean? And you make it up according to your own denominational understanding. But what the Greek is actually saying is, godliness, as we would call it, is actually founded upon the fear of Elohim. And because of that fear, how do we go about our everyday life? Does it now display quote unquote godliness? So again, this is a really important thing moving forward when we read certain passages.
The Eusebeia and the Semnotes, there is also too what we believe is actually truly missing. And we're generalizing, but this is what's missing by and large from the context of the body. This is why people will bring and think nothing to bring violence to a weekly Sabbath and have arguments and not treat each other with the reverence that they should. But also what we see happen at the annual appointed times. And some of the behavior that is actually demonstrated during the appointed times is because these aspects, which the Greek is breaking down here, is actually not in play. And so what you're actually seeing is a lot of bad behavior coming through the body because the fear of Elohim is actually not matured. It's not coming through. And so we want to get to that state as we grow and mature in the faith, that our character and how we are treating one another and Messiah indeed in one another is actually going now to another level. And because this is missing, we see a lot of violence done, and people thinking nothing of it. They think nothing of it to create arguments or to act poorly or badly during the appointed times or even the weekly Sabbath. And this is simply where the Father does not want us. He wants us to move on and mature past this, that we will actually have a true and healthy fear of Elohim. And if that's not being demonstrated in the character to one another, with one another, we are indeed not maturing in this aspect, this fundamental foundational aspect that ultimately is going to love perfected.
Okay, fear of the unknown. Here in 2 Chronicles 20, verse 29, it says, the fear of Elohim came on all the kingdoms of the countries when they heard that Yah had fought against the enemies of Israel. And so the word here being used is not actually yareh or yirah. It's this word pachad, a sudden alarm. Remember how I said that the Hebrew word chatat, which the Greek equivalent is phobos. This is abject terror, completely petrified. But if you take that down a notch, you end up with pachad. So for the context, this is the nations outside of the house of Israel, and they're hearing a report of something that the Elohim of Israel has done for his house. And it's bringing alarm, but because they're not intimate with the situation, they don't have that abject terror because it's not coming on their doorstep. And so they're hearing something, it's piquing interest, it's piquing their ears, and they're going, what is this that's going on? Is this alarm? Like, is this shock? But it's not abject terror. And so hence why we've called it fear of the unknown.
Yeah, they simply do not know who this Elohim of Israel is. But they are certainly in the sense of a battle context going, okay, what is actually going on here? And so there's this position of, as Michael had said, alarm, but not a knowing. And so this is a very interesting context in which to do this. They're not fearing an Elohim they know. They're alarmed regarding an Elohim they don't know and a people who have this Elohim. And so this is a very interesting context. They're not experiencing Elohim the way the house of Israel is. So it just denotes this sense of alarm, but not based on true knowledge.
Now, would Elohim use this as part of a witness that because we have these verses that all nations will know who Elohim is. We have these statements that all will be brought to the fear of Elohim. We believe so, because all of us eventually in the house, we have to go on this spiritual journey. We have to go on this spiritual journey, and that will always start off with, who is this Elohim? Who is God? A lot of us thought we knew who Elohim was when we came from, predominantly, let's say, a Christian Western background. And most of you will know that you thought you knew Elohim, and then you were brought back to the foundations of your faith, and you had to relearn who Elohim really was. What did he actually say? Does he want this? Does he want that? What is it that he loves? What is it that he despises? And so many of us have experienced being brought back to square one, as it was. Who is this Elohim? For some of you, you had to come there right off the bat, not having had a spiritual journey. But a lot of us already had somewhat of a spiritual journey, but we still had to be brought back to this place of, who is Elohim? Who is Yah, the Elohim of the Bible and the Elohim of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? And as part of that, many of us would have experienced maybe a bit of chatat or phobos. A lot of us, especially with a past Christian background, would have had that moment of, oh my goodness, I was doing all these things as part of my so-called faith, and these are the things he hates. And that should bring about a healthy dose of terror. Oh my goodness, you get brought back to this foundation of, who is Elohim?
When the Apostle Paul was dealing with the Romans and you got the Mars Hill incident, he's actually has to refer to the tomb of the unknown Elohim. And one of the things with this, and this is the place where Christian apologetics and stuff tries to battle with the agnostic or atheistic mindset. And they're trying to deal with this, well, is there a God? And if there is, how am I supposed to view this? And of course, it's only got the labyrinth of the various religious expressions that whatever a person may or may not have experienced from an agnostic or atheist position, they have no idea and don't even know whether they should even believe that there is indeed a God at all. And so this unknown God, and so the atheist, the agnostic, even that which is starting to believe, they will place or put upon whatever their thoughts of a God is. And so most atheists and agnostics, and I'd say this to atheists all the time, you don't believe in your version of God. That doesn't mean you don't believe in God. I never take the atheist position in that sense. It's like, well, if I had your version of God, I wouldn't believe in him either. But where did that version come from? Well, it's coming from whatever their life experience or however Elohim has been represented to them. And of course, if that's being misrepresented through religion, through their experiences in life, or through the witness or character of people who have claimed to believe in God, this is the only place they're deriving it from. So they get this weird concept, and most certainly they're not going to get a proper established or understanding of what the fear of Elohim is. But when you actually come into the faith, there is an establishment, there's a realization, wait a minute, there's a reason for my life. There is, responsibility, accountability, and consequence to this. We are fallen spiritual beings having a physical experience in the test, according to Ecclesiastes, particularly written in great detail by Solomon there. We're not physical beings trying to become spiritual. And this generally tends to be the agnostic atheist mindset, where they're just trying to go, well, why am I here? Where is this all going? What's this all for? And so you see people go down all these weird different journeys, a lot of them, new age or old age as such, and they're trying to fill this void spiritually, where they're thinking, well, I need to become spiritual. I need to ascend to this higher level. And it's actually quite the opposite from the Hebraic mindset. We are actually the spiritual beings that have been inserted into the physical experience. And so when we don't get that the right way around, this trying to establish, and the Apostle Paul knew this very much with the Romans, for instance, who had a plethora of trying to explain their spiritual mindsets with all of these different gods and ways and flavors and expressions of it. Indeed, we see many religions on earth still trapped in this. And so this is one of these things of why we need to be established with this whole understanding of this fear of God, or this fear of Elohim, because the journey will then start, hopefully, to get us to a proper and mature aspect of this. So as a savior, we will come in. So once we grapple with that, and that's kind of our infant state. And then if we keep maturing, so, okay, God saved me from what and what for, and why did I have to be saved at all, these sorts of things. And you work through this in an infancy state. Unfortunately, a lot of religion doesn't get people much further past the Savior aspect or the Messiah aspect. He's come to rescue me, but there's no other questions there behind that. Well, if he's come to rescue me, well, I didn't decide to be born. I didn't decide to be born fallen. I didn't decide that I'm going to die. This is this so-called God. So what am I actually here for? And so you're grappling, or you can stay in that infant state. But as we start to mature, we'll start to see him as a father. And this is where we get into child or sonship. But many in a broken family nucleus in a modern day world, well, their example of a father in the physical test, if you will, has maybe not been the best. And so how do I relate to a God when my actual shadow picture or physical experience is not teaching me how a father should act or be or input into my life in a healthy way? If you progress past that and can get through that, then we head to king. And when we start to view him as a king, that he is actually sitting as the head of his kingdom, we will start to then understand the servant aspect of who he is. So to serve into a king, and of course, kingdom isn't a mindset in the Western world that we've experienced. We often think in terms of democracy, or we think in terms of, socialism, communism, all these sorts of things. But a true theocracy sense is not truly understood generally with a Western mindset. We don't think kingdom. We don't understand king. And so what's coming is a theocracy. Now, a kingdom with an unrighteous king can be a very oppressive environment. It can be a very dictator environment, but a righteous king based on true fear and ultimately love perfected is actually the true model for an eternal loving sense. And so, and again, in the Western mindset, when we talk king, we've got all this. We got a lot of weird things going on with how we view king and kingship. And then, of course, ultimately, as we mature in the faith, we will start to understand him as the high priest, the author of our faith, our truly who is Messiah and who is he ultimately for us in this journey. And when we start to learn him as the high priest in this purchasing and taking full accountability for our experience in the physical time domain, then it starts to become a very different relationship. And we can start to head into this final place of looking at, and of course, Michael and I, sometimes ad nauseum, but we don't believe you can. We think that this is the one that most will not reach in the faith. Certainly Judaism, your Hebrew roots, Messianic movements, they may get to high priest, but very few get beyond this ultimate understanding of reverence in a bridegroom sense. And so during the series, this is why we take it there. It's not about the bride, it's actually about the bridegroom. And Christianity just kind of skipped it, Michael? They just kind of went, oh, okay, it's all about me, the bride. And what we're actually trying to do is say, no, actually, he'll make it about us when this is all over. We don't have to make it about ourselves now. We need to make it about the bridegroom. And of course, to have a true bridegroom sense, we're going to have to understand what the fear of Elohim means.
You know, and we've got this statement here that from savior through to high priest, this is the place that trust is learned. And, you know, to use an analogy, let's use the analogy of a newborn child who happens to be a female, okay? This newborn child comes into the time domain, and her authority in that moment is the parents. And there's, you know, what will the child experience, you know? And so will it be afraid? Now, here's the thing. Can you trust something that is fearful and I mean fearful in the negative sense? Who here has made wise decisions when they were afraid of something? You know, we see this often where because of fear in the negative sense, it drives our decision-making process, and then we actually end up making a hash of it. And so if we remain in this pre-childlike state, look, this is why self-condemnation is so crippling spiritually. Because if you stay in this place of fear, of abject terror, he cannot trust you, because who can trust? Like, think of the dog in the proverbial trap that is afraid, and so they're biting the one trying to save them. Can you trust that animal? No, you can't. But as this newborn child grows, it becomes an infant. You know, do you trust the toddler with as much as, say, the young child? No. But as that child goes from toddler to a small child, eventually into young adulthood, you're able to trust them more and more and more. And eventually, that young adult becomes an adult. And so can you trust them at the adult stage? And so this proverbial young woman now becomes a fully mature woman. Eventually, this mature woman hopefully would end up becoming married. Now, at this stage, she has proven or displayed and shown herself that she can be trusted because of all of this that has already preceded it. And all of this is based on fear. And you start off at this place of fear, terror, but then that reverence starts to grow. And as that reverence grows and grows and grows and grows, you can actually become a trustworthy vessel. And so this is why we say this is the stage that trust is learned, not only from us to Elohim, but from Elohim to us. Because when the bride of Messiah will rule and reign with Messiah, she will have already displayed that she is trustworthy. And this is intrinsically tied in to the fear and reverence of Elohim. Okay, let's start at the beginning of the journey. We start off at Phobos. The house of Israel, when even while they were in Egypt, they got to see some pretty interesting plagues come upon the earth, completely demolish the then greatest nation on earth. And then they would be brought to Mount Sinai, and we read the account. They were absolutely terrified. Well, Yah chose to take the Israelites on this journey and to actually start it at this place of Phobos, or the Hebrew equivalent, Chatat. Now we've put here, why not stop at Phobos? And this is something that Judaism, by and large, and a lot of the Messianics, they don't understand, because they stay in this place of Phobos. Like, it's almost like they're treading on eggshells around Elohim. And while that is where he starts us off, does he want us to remain there? Because again, can you trust a fearful vessel? I would argue not. He would desire that Phobos to then become reverence. And so hopefully people can understand that you cannot have reverence if you don't have a foundation of Phobos. How can you revere something that you do not have an understanding of what that entity is capable of? Why do we revere Elohim? Because he is Elohim. He's the creator. We have many accounts of scripture that should give us a healthy dose of Phobos. But without that Phobos, you cannot have reverence. So he wants that abject terror to grow. But then why not stop at reverence? Why not stop there? Because arguably, if you do not have Phobos go to reverence and that trust being learned, as shown on the previous slide, you cannot actually have a bridal governance ruling in the fear of Elohim.
And this is where it gets interesting with reverence, because a lot of people don't realize that sometimes in some of the movements, be it on both sides of the river, with Judaism, Hebrew roots, Messianic movements, or in the various expressions of Christianity, they think doing things or works is a form of reverence. Now, it can be done from a place of reverence, but a lot of times these things can actually be done out of sure fear, and obedience has come out of the Phobos place, and it needs to mature into, no, we're actually doing these things in the reverent place. Now, many have lived in this place of condemnation, and eventually their works or their doings fail, and they never mature and grow in this place of reverence. And so they can lose their faith, or they walk away, or they do their things because they never progress beyond the foundation of this and to actually mature in the place of reverence. And then if we don't do that, if we don't mature, again, he's not bringing a child bride to the altar for ruling. He's going to bring a mature. And so the way that it's reflected is bridegroom and bride for the sake of our physical shadow picture. But what he's doing is actually raising something that is reached a level of intimacy in a perfected sense that actually can be trusted with something. And so we must mature in the reverent place, and to build upon the initial Phobos, or even the Hatat in the Hebrew, but where it's going is where it's actually important. And again, Hebrew thinking and culture is it builds upon itself. It's not been there, done that. Phobos, as expressed in the Greek, or the Hatat in the Hebrew, is actually an established thing that is necessary, but it's to move us into this whole journey of reverence. And that's where our faith is supposed to mature and progress. Of course, this is where we think the enemy comes in to attack. He wants to keep us in the childlike Phobos state. And if he can keep us there, we'll never mature in the reverence and therefore actually negate and take us out of the picture to be able to be a trusted bridal governance. And so he's looking for his desire to be accomplished, not ours. And that's why the important position is that we take it from, it needs to be in our journey here about the bridegroom, not about the bride. If it's about the bridegroom, the bride element takes care of itself. And so we don't want to get this mixed around and confused, as we see in many understandings of how, this whole bride of Christ or bride of Messiah thing is taken. A true bride, it will be all about her bridegroom. And to a bridegroom, it will be all about his bride. But there's a time coming when he lifts us up and when we've reached a place where we can be trusted. And so we have to work through this reverence, this meat in the sandwich, if you will, between Phobos and where he's taking his desire.
And, to give the parable of the parents and the young adult, what Western society would call a teenager, which is not a biblical thing, but which parent has found that their young adult, every now and then, the reverence of the parents has kind of disappeared and the young adult starts playing up? What do? You have to bring them back to a place of Phobos every now and then so that the reverence can come back in. And would Elohim do that with his people? Has reverence of Elohim been lost? Well, how do you bring this reverence back in? Because remember, Elohim has a desire that he will have a bridal governance. And if we lose that fear of Elohim, there's no way we're going to get to this ruling place. And so how do you bring reverence back into the picture so that we can mature past this point of reverence? Well, we would argue he brings us back to this place of Phobos or Chatat. Just so people can understand that you cannot have reverence without a foundation of fear, but we must not remain there. If not, we will not progress through these stages. And so Curtis and I are saying that the path to the bridal altar is through this. Does Scripture corroborate this? We're going to zoom right out. So we're going to zoom right out. We're going to look at this from not only a plan of redemption perspective, but from an eternal perspective. And we're going to make a couple of bold statements as we zoom out. And then what we'll do, once we've looked at this passage and we've zoomed out and we see what this helicopter view of the plan of redemption is all about, then we will zoom back in and go through this journey. So hold on to your seats. We have this passage in Isaiah 46, 8 through to 10. Remember this and stand firm. Recall it to mind, you transgressors. Remember the former things of old, for I am Elohim, and there is no other. I am Elohim, and there is none like me, declaring the end from the beginning, and from ancient times things not yet done, saying, my counsel shall stand, and I will accomplish all my purpose. Now, before we zoom right out, because in the English, it's nice, Elohim is Elohim, there's none like him, but the English is actually almost obfuscating what is actually really being said in the Hebrew. But before we tackle that, let's look at two words here. Yah is saying, recall something to mind, remember something from the former things of old, that it's got to do with his counsel standing. But the point that we get really in the English is that he will accomplish his purpose. His will shall be done. The word accomplish here in the Hebrew is the word asar. It's a very broad word, much like the English word to do. But what's really interesting is that in the Hebrew, it's got many overtones that the word in English do simply does not have. To accomplish, to make, to deal with, to act, to effect, to produce. But what's really interesting is when you start getting further in, to put in order. He's going to put in order his purpose, to observe, to celebrate, to acquire property, This almost has overtones of purchasing something, to appoint, to ordain. Think of a ruling bridal governance being appointed, being ordained, being instituted, being brought about. Look at this: to press and to squeeze. This now has overtones of narrow and hard pressed is the way to life, and few will find it. Why? Because broad is the way to destruction. And so in Elohim's purpose, or as we will see, the purpose here, chafetz, a delight, a pleasure, a longing, the good pleasure, something that he delights in. So he has a desire, a longing for something. Elohim longs for something, his good desire. And how will he bring it about? Well, it has overtones that a purchase is going to be involved. There's going to be an appointing to a position of authority, an ordaining, an instituting, and that this will be done through crushing, through pressing, through squeezing. And that's just what we get from the English, okay?
You know, one of the things.
Oh, go on.
With this, just to hear it's my counsel shall stand. So he's making a point of something, this ruling governance that's going to go. It's about his desire, his purpose, not ours. What he's wanting for us is to gain the reverence so that we'll actually want to learn what is it that you desire, not what I desire and my concept of heaven and, you know, what my concept of God is and what I want to make you to be and all these sorts of things. That's not, in the sense of the analogy, a great marriage. One of the things that all marriage is that we're actually seeing a statement here of an achad line of sight in his purpose. He's wanting to rule and reign with something that is seen and understanding his desire, and therefore it's administering that. And this is going to be a delight. His pleasure, his good pleasure in all of this. And if you think of shalom in the home and a very healthy marriage context, the husband and the wife are achad. And so his desire has become her desire, and it is their desire. This counsel shall stand. And it implies something just a bit more than just him shouting from a mountaintop, Michael. This seems to imply that there's an achad nature to his final desire. And if we miss this, again, by just staying in the phobos at the mountain where he's speaking the words that they were so terrified in hearing, that literally you can't move into what is the reason for all of this. And so what's captured here in Isaiah and the great prophet Isaiah is actually something quite interesting, because it's encapsulating all of it. The narrow, the pressing, as Michael was saying, the what he's taking delight in, the fact that it's actually a part of an achad nature, which he's going to delight and long in. And it's, you know, He's Elohim. He's entitled to have his desire. And the question is, are we interested in what his desire is, or are we more interested in it's all about me? And a true bridal position, as given in the physical picture, is that you don't want to marry something that is all about her. You don't want to be in union or achad with that. And you don't want to marry a bridegroom where it's just going to be all about him and who cares about you. You see, we're actually seeing something coming together here, but something has to be perfected, and it must go through this reverent maturity, this progression.
So we've looked at what we can glean from the English of this passage. But let's actually look at what the Hebrew is actually saying. And remember, we're zooming right out. We're zooming right out, plan of redemption from an eternal perspective. We've kind of almost comically dubbed this the RB version, the River Branch version. But this is what the Hebrew is actually saying when you look in there. And this is a passage that we've dissected this, because it's like, is it really saying this? Well, yes, it is. It says, remember these. actually. So the English would say, remember this, but the Hebrew is actually plural. Remember something in the plural form and have courage, it says. The Hebrew behind have courage, it actually says, it uses the term ish, man, this idea of being manly, as it were. But it says have courage. So don't be in a place of terror. Have courage, overcome this place of chatat, overcome this place of phobos. Recall it to mind, you transgressors. So he's saying, remember, yes, you are from a transgressing position and something's gone on, but I want you to grow past the point of terror. Remember the former things from eternity. In the English, it says, remember the former things of old. The Hebrew is very clear. It uses the word olam. Remember the former things of eternity. Now, what's interesting is we have no memory of this. And he's saying, bring something to mind, for I am Elohim, and there is no other in time. When you look at the Hebrew here, it has this idea, it uses the word od, and it can actually have this time domain perspective. And what Yah's saying is, there is none other like me within time. I am Elohim, and look at this statement, there ceased to be one like me. It doesn't say there is none like me. It says there ceased to be one like me. The Hebrew there is ephes. It literally means something was there and it stopped being. And so Elohim is saying, remember these things from before time, before creation. There ceased to be one like me. Something was lost. This is what he's wanting you to remember or bring to mind. And it has something to do with us being transgressors, declaring from the beginning. The word there for beginning is reshit. Now think in the beginning. What's that in Hebrew? Reshit. He's speaking prior to the creation of time. These statements here are speaking outside the time domain. And from before creation, things not yet done, saying, my counsel shall arise and stand. Now, the word for counsel, etzah, it means advice, purpose, the root of that, ya'at, to advise, to consult, to give counsel. Think 24 elders. Think Jerusalem council. That's what the Hebrew is saying. You mean his council, his eldership, shall arise and stand. Now, in the Hebrew, the word for arise and stand, kum, it can mean, it's used often in the prophets within the context of resurrection. It's used within the context of appointing the priesthood. And so his eldership, his counsel, his bride, his scepter that will dash the nations to pieces shall be resurrected and appointed. And he will accomplish, we've already looked at this, his desire. Go on.
I was going to say, what we have captured in this is an incredible picture of something that has ceased, and he's restoring it. And it actually is what he's actually restoring is outside the time domain. And this is what's interesting. This is now going to give us an understanding of the purpose of the time domain. There's a restoration of something, and we're seeing for the last almost 2,000 years, we have had this incredible fulfillment of the first fruits resurrection, and 24 elders, at least, were raised as an example for us to know. And this is why John on the island of Patmos, many years later, he literally saw the inkling or the literal fulfillment of what this passage is actually saying in Isaiah, which is one of the for me, is one of the most grieving scriptures I can read in all of the Word, because I'm actually seeing now, and have for many years. When I first saw this, it was like, wow, do we actually have a mourning husband? Is something happened that he is going to restore, and it's going to require a maturity in love to do this. And what is it that this transgressors, and we've got here Mystery Babylon, this greater context is spiritual adultery. What actually happened outside the time domain? We're not going to go into that today, but next year we're going to look at something at Sukkot and actually pack this even more as to what perhaps Scripture is alluding to here. But one thing we can say for sure, his desire is to have her arise and stand. And so, and it appears that desire had ceased to be. So we're seeing this plan of redemption now from the bridegroom's perspective, not us needing to be saved in the time domain, but the actual why he's doing it, because he's actually restoring something at a much greater level. And we can miss this in our traditional religious mindsets and journeys. And it doesn't matter which side of the river that you might be on. So we don't get to point the fingers at everyone while we do this. But it is an exceptional thing that is being stated here by the prophet Isaiah, and he seems to understand or being given the understanding of something to the point where, as Michael had said, remember. So Isaiah appears to be in a position where he could be spoken to in such a way.
We've put here, because this is from Isaiah 46. If you look at Isaiah 47, it's speaking of Babylon, and Revelation would then go on to quote chapter 47, and using the term mystery Babylon, the great spiritual harlot. But what's really interesting is that you have this statement here, I am Elohim and there is none like me. When you look at chapter 47, Babylon, and by extension, Mystery Babylon, uses the same verbiage, I am and there is none like me. And so you see this great pride coming up. You see this pride. And when you actually look at the Hebrew, it's almost verbatim, but there's this key word that's missing. But this is why we've put this thing. There seems to be that the reverence was lost. And how do you bring it back in? And as Curtis said, what is the purpose of this time domain? What is it? We believe that this test, a key part of it is so that reverence can be brought back into the picture, because he has a desire. He wants a bride that is reverent. He wants a bride that he can trust. And so what is this time domain all about? So that's the zoom out. I know it's big. I know it's huge. And as Curtis said, we're going to look at this next year. So let's zoom back in and do this in a way that we can start to piece together and understand. Let's go on this journey. Over to you, Mr. Reed.
Think of what we just talked about as being a picture of in the marriage context, which he wants us to understand in the shadow picture, and just the earthly marriage context. When you get to a place of separation or divorce or all these sorts of things, the thing that is assuredly lost between husband and wife is reverence. It's gone by one or other or both. And if you lose this place of reverence, you can lose the relationship. And so he's restoring something through this. Why he needs to teach us fear, not as in just phobos, but the completion of it to love. I've got here the parable of Shofar So Good. That little girl up there is a new member of the family that came in about 3 years ago. And that was her when she came in to our home. And so to look at this, I'm going to take you as to who we had in the home at this time as someone who had gone before her. And so many of you may know because I've used her before in certain examples, but I'll reflect this real quickly because it's very important from a discipleship aspect in coming into the home. She came into a home. This is she's passed away now, our dear MJ. And this picture here is when we got her at 3 years old. And she was a very, very beautiful animal, but she was a rescue. And we decided that we would take her on. And she had a few phobos issues and things like that. But she was a very sweet, kind, spirited animal. She would begin to have fun and get to understand us more as parents or as fathers and things like that. And as a result, she would start to learn this reverency. As that would happen, then she would be rewarded and things like that. You can't see in this picture, she just received a donut from a place called Tim Hortons. And I was now eating the rest of my donut and she appeared to want more. And so she goes on this journey. Here she is, and basically as a part of this, she's in the home and she has truly learned a reverent place. And after, a number of years with her, she'd gone from Phobos being rescued to an animal that had actually learned and established reverency, and she'd learned to trust once again. She'd been neglected in an abusive way before we got her, and she had lost trust. And so now she's learned to trust us once again. As a result, we could start to do all sorts of things with her, like put cans on her head and things like that. And she would sit there and she would go, I don't know why you're doing this, but I'll just trust that somehow there's a reason for it. And as she grew, she would also become an ice hockey fan and support the right team. And so she'd watch the games and do things and wear all sorts of things. And then eventually she would progress to going fishing with me, and she would dress up in her gear and come out on the water and that sort of a thing. And it was all a part of trust. And of course, she would be loved and loved with us. And there she is towards the end of her life and having fun. And with all of this, she would finish up her days, and she often liked to read Bible Pathway Adventures materials and things like that, which seemed to bless her. The point I make with all of this is she was an animal that she had to learn reverency. But once she did, and it was very important that she did, that she didn't remain a Phobos, is she was a very powerful, very strong animal. And you don't want an animal that was that strong and that powerful to be fearful. Because if something remains fearful, it can hurt others. And so we needed to progress her to a place where she once again learned reverence, understanding, and trust. And suddenly we would have this animal that was not in a fearful place. And so she became this incredible animal that by the end of her days, and that's a picture of her just before she would pass. Gee, it's amazing how you miss them. And she would actually, look at you, are you just having a bad day or something? But what she didn't do was live in fear at all. If even I was in a bad mood or, something like that, she would just look at me and go, okay, you're not having a good day. But she wasn't living in this sense of, oh, what's he going to do to me, and all that kind of a thing. She had progressed to a place where the reverency between us and Pip and being in the family nucleus wasn't one where she worried at all, regardless of the mood, regardless of the circumstance, regardless of what was happening. She had a complete understanding based on this journey of reverence. Well, this was the discipleship that Shofar came into. Now, this is little Shofar. Now, at this point when we got her, she was also a rescue as a puppy. And so we tend to do this. But at this stage when we got her, and this is a photo snapped of her when we just got her, she was actually in Phobos. She was quite scared. Who are these people? What's going on? And she's now in her little fearful state. So we needed to progress this. But what she got brought into was a very different environment than, say, MJ had, because Shofar was going to get discipleship. Now, here she is here, and she's gotten a look on her face because she had done a transgression as a puppy. She's in this Phobos state, and she's just learning the Torah of the house. Of course, as a part of that, she took out one of my bride's shoes. Now, that didn't go down too well with the master, as you can imagine. And so she was learning another stage of reverence now. But of course, at this point, trust has not been established yet. So she's truly wondering, is this it? Is this the end of my little doggy life in the time domain? She would have no idea what's going on. She's going to learn and be disciplined in that sense. As a part of that, she didn't know how to work it. So she's trying to look at me during this time, and she's trying to work me with the most repentant heart that she had. She got in big trouble for this. And so she'd sit outside and she'd be doing everything she could to get back in the good books. And so she would learn to work me with these little doggy eyes. It's funny that she's got these special little dog power eyes, and it kind of melts my heart, and it's a very powerful thing, and I got to look away at times. But she's trying to use this on me and on Pip. But trust is still not established yet. And so here she is growing up a little bit after this incident, and MJ's with her. And now what MJ was doing was actually discipling her. And it was very interesting. MJ watched her get in trouble for this incident, and she didn't like it. MJ stood off to the side and she was watching, but she allowed me because she trusted me, and she loved Shofar, but Shofar got disciplined. And she stood there and watched it, but she wasn't happy about it. And of course, as soon as I left the room and whatnot, MJ would comfort her and then show her the right way to behave. And so this was done. And so the journey of reverence began. But actually now discipleship was coming to the rescue as well. So she had the help of MJ, who had overcome, who had been through this whole position. And MJ did a fantastic job. She was a very good teacher. So this is where we're at now. And so my little parable, Shofar So Good, reverence, trust is now in its final stages of being established. That's Shofar now, and Shofar So Good. She has progressed into a very beautiful place, and now has reached a place of reverence and trust that even her discipler, who had overcome with MJ, was not at that same age. So in other words, Shofar is much further ahead because of the environment she came into and the discipleship that she had, not only with just Pip and I, but also with MJ. And so now that is Shofar at the exact same age that we got MJ at, but much further ahead as a result. So Shofar So Good. But reverence, learning reverence and trust was all the journey into this. And I think Shofar's got a pretty good chance of finishing up where MJ did. So if lost, how do you get reverence back in the picture? So if you look at the little example of the shadow picture that we're giving you, if something had, let's say when we'd gotten MJ, if something was lost and she lost that trust or went back to a place of Phobos, if this had actually occurred, what do you do, in this sort of situation? Well, in a bigger picture sense, what if reverence was lost outside the time domain? What if reverence was lost in this picture, and now you have an Elohim that needs to reestablish something here? And then now we start to see why fear, in its proper context, building upon itself at Phobos or Hatat, and now developing into this mature sense, because he's getting us back to something, but it's going to involve our repentance. And possibly we're going to see that this is a two-way street for something to truly be a chad.
Okay, lack of fear, flood judgment. Let's look at Genesis 6. The earth was corrupt in Elohim's sight, and the earth was filled with violence. And Elohim saw the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way on earth. Now, what is often missed is that prior to the flood, there is no such thing as atheism. And so the earth, you see, it's got to this place that it was so corrupt and so filled with violence that Elohim had to do a whole reboot. Think of this as a shadow picture of actually being plugged into the time domain. And so how can you get to a place where the earth is filled with violence, even though that there's no atheism? Like, everyone knows who Elohim is at this point. We would argue that there's a lack of fear. There's a lack of reverence. Pride has crept in. And one of the ways you can see this, everyone misses this. The earth was corrupt in Elohim's sight. There's the inference there that they thought the earth, they were just fine. Notice in whose sight the earth is corrupted. I believe here we are again in the days of Noah. If you look outside, the average, non-believer will say things have never been better. Look at all our technology. Look at all our so-called wisdom and knowledge. And those that actually seeing things from Elohim's point of view go in, my goodness, the earth is corrupt. But at this stage, there is no atheism. You can only get to this place if there's a lack of reverence. There's no fear of Yah in the earth. And the outcome of that is violence. Violence. This is how you can usually spot that if there's violence being done within a body context, what is lacking? We would argue is the lack of the fear of Yah. The outcome of that will always lead to violence.
Yeah. In fact, with the loss of reverence, it will lead to violence everywhere. And as mentioned earlier, this is why we see such bad behavior that will often occur within the so-called believers on the set apart times, weekly and annual. And one of the most grievous things that I've seen over the years was not just people struggling with their spiritual journey in general, but the lack of reverence when it came to the appointed times. They thought nothing to behave like that during a weekly Sabbath or during his annual appointed times, and to bring violence into these things. And like I say, with manifestation of just emotionally bad behavior, even doctrinal arguments, things like this occurring on the Sabbaths. And one of the things as we grow and mature, hopefully our spiritual violence to these set apart times will actually start to diminish. Because our reverence is increasing. So the outcome of reverence is actually the decrease in violence. And so it's very important as to what Michael was pointing out there with that before the flood, is that a reverence had indeed been lost at this point, and they're unaware of it. And so he's going to reboot the whole thing to the point where it actually says it grieved, it was grieving him that indeed he'd created this time domain test at that point. And so he's rebooting it, and he's going to reset, starting with full boss in a big way. The fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast. So this is interesting. After this judgment of every beast of the earth and every bird of the heavens, upon everything that creeps on the ground and all fish of the sea, into your hand they are delivered. Every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. And as I give you the green plants, I give you everything. Now, this is interesting here because the array here, the fear to be afraid, is coming into play for the creation. Now, this is a necessity that this is actually happening, because the fear and the dread, the hatat, to be afraid, to be terrified. Now, this is important because now if the animals do not have this in play, and we're in this diminished, even further diminished fallen state where we're going to be needing to consume the animals, basically the animals would just come to us. And if actually if this dread wasn't put into them, it's quite possible that many of the species that we are able to eat of the clean food now on Earth wouldn't exist. Simply put, you wouldn't need to be a deer hunter. You just go sit and call out to the deer in the bush and they would come to you. Well, if you can imagine how that would be abused by mankind, if this was not in the animals, we'd have no deer left. We'd have no fish left. We'd have nothing. We would have consumed and abused this. So he's putting something into the creation for our sake and their sake so that we can actually have a coexistence. And how is he doing that? Through actually implementing, in the Hebrew, hatat, or actually in the equivalent in the Greek, phobos. So this is very interesting how it actually has to play a part of reestablishing the whole setting post the flood judgment, which was a result of violence being done as lack of reverence. And so again, the reboot is happening at the phobos level, even with the creation itself.
What's really interesting is that we believe this is a shadow picture to something far greater. Who knows the story of Nadav and Avihu, the two sons of Aaron, and they came before Elohim in a non-reverent fashion. What happened to them? They got consumed, did they not? And so this idea that if you draw before without reverence, if you lose this, not only the reverence, but you lose the phobos, it can lead you to being consumed. And we see this with Nadab and Abihu. Now, what's really interesting is that even though animals are in this state right now, if both parties, the human and the animal, learn to trust each other and learn to overcome that fear of one another, what happens? You get these, stories of a man becoming part of the lion pack and things like that. There is a place where this fear and this phobos can be overcome on the foundation of trust. And so this is what we believe that Yah is actually putting into the shadow picture to teach mankind a huge principle about this great plan of redemption.
All of creation and everything Elohim is doing is establishing or teaching us this principle, if we can see it. No reverence leads to violence. Abraham said, I did it because I thought. There is no fear of Elohim at all in this place, and they will kill me because of my wife. Yareh. What is going on here?
We made the statement earlier from the flood that without the fear of Elohim, it leads to violence and death. Abraham knew this. He knew this. This is why, he lied about Sarah. Well, White's lied, if you want to call it that. She technically was his sister. But he thought if there's no fear of Elohim in this place, the outcome will be violence, and that violence will be coming my way. He understood that without this fear and reverence of Elohim, the outcome is violence. He absolutely knew this.
But as for you and your servants, I know that you do not yet fear Yah, Elohim. Why the need to fear here in Exodus 9:30? This is interesting. But as for you and your servants, I know that you do not yet fear Elohim. So what's the context that has to be established here? And it has to be put in at the foundational level. The only way that they can learn the true fear here, and I believe this is referring to also reverence and honor here as it's being encapsulated in the Hebrew and the Yareh here overall, is that there's not yet a true reverence that's been established in this picture. And so where do you go? How do you actually do this? Well, there's going to be an encounter here. And during the Exodus, he's going to take the house, he's going to establish the house of Israel and the sojourners and everything that came out of this whole hand of Yah being moving as a part of the whole Exodus picture. Sometimes we've reduced the whole, I guess, Michael, the plagues
Yeah.
to almost relegate it as if, well, it was just something that went on, and there would be, this, encounter, and then we try and get these cinematic pictures of, okay, well, maybe it was a bit more than our Sunday school teachings on it. But I think if we actually could see the hand of Elohim move the way some actually witnessed upon the earth, that Phobos was well and truly in play. Right from the actual Exodus and the establishment of the house of Israel, something is going to be establishing this. And if any of us could have witnessed the true hand of Elohim moving at this time, the way some did, I think we would get a sense of Phobos or Hatat in the Hebrew, Michael. And I think that was the actual intent here. And in fact, we're going to see maybe even a greater measure of this during the fulfillment of the fall Moedim with the wrath of Elohim. He is the actual last measure that's going to take place in order for people to repent before his return, is actually going to have to go back literally to Hatat or to Phobos to actually have them understand, I am your Elohim, and you need to actually get back to this place. So it's going to, it appears that that this is what he does to bring people as a part of true or to get them on to repent. And so we're actually going to see this on the bookends. But it's interesting how this was also used right at the establishment of the house of Israel, Michael.
Yeah. And so, we see Pharaoh and his servants, they don't revere Yah. So how does Yah bring reverence back into the picture? Well, they were going to experience some awesome things that would bring the fear and dread of Elohim back in the picture. And you read further on in the account, the servants, they got to the fear of Yah sooner than Pharaoh, didn't they? Because they're going, Pharaoh, please stop. They're like, can't you see what's going on here? Like, there's even this statement that the servants say, this has to be the finger of Elohim. That the servants were brought to a place of fearing Elohim way sooner than Pharaoh, but Phobos and Hatat and Terah was literally the last-ditched effort. It's like, okay, you're not going to fear and honor me? I'm going to show you who's boss here. Think again of the teenager or the young adult that's forgotten the reverence of the parents. And every now and then they need to be brought back to Phobos to bring that reverence back in. And so, again, the plagues are not Yah being vindictive. They're actually an act of love. They're actually an act of love.
It's an interesting thing when we consider that it says that Elohim hardened the heart of Pharaoh. You think, well, why would he do that? Because he needed to. Because Pharaoh would have been absolute dread, and Phobos, we actually don't see what's actually being established here, because there's a demonstration going on that's all a part about he's going to establish the house of Israel on something. He wants them to experience something, but it's interesting how he hardened the heart of Pharaoh during this time. So his servants and everyone else is freaking out in Phobos. He needed to put Pharaoh in a different pace, and we often don't consider this when we read the account. They just hardened his heart, so that he would be obstinate against the instructions of Moshe and Aaron. But it's bigger than that. It was required as a part of this event. I don't think we actually understand how terrifying this actually really was, the dread that was actually going on. And so was there a necessity to do that to Pharaoh in order that he would remain in this place of being obstinate, which, again, we don't often consider in the whole picture.
And so is fear required as part of his plan of redemption? We're making the case that not only is it required, he's orchestrated this whole time domain to bring fear and reverence back into the picture. And that a bridal governance, the foundation of that bridal governance will be fear matured to reverence, matured to being trustworthy. And that without this fear and reverence, there is no trust. And so is fear required? And is this the whole purpose of, the meaning of the time domain? Or as Rome would say, what is the meaning of life? What if it was as simple as bringing reverence back in the picture because it was lost? This is the house of Israel. They've now witnessed the events of the Exodus, and they've been brought to Mount Sinai. And it says this in Exodus 20. Now, when all the people saw the thunder and the flashes of lightning and the sound of the trumpet and the mountain smoking, the people were afraid and trembled. They're in a place of Chatat, of Phobos. They stood far off and said to Moshe, you speak to us and we will listen, but do not let Elohim speak to us lest we die. Moses said to the people, do not fear, for Elohim has come to test you, that the fear of him may be before you, that you may not sin. Now, in the Hebrew, it's using the same roots, essentially, yareh and yirah. And so this is how we know that both aspects of the Hebrew word are being used here, because he's saying, do not yareh, for Elohim has come to test you, that the yirah may be in you. And so he's literally saying, he doesn't want you to remain in Phobos. Yes, it's needed. You need to know who you're standing before, but he wants that Phobos to go to awe and respect. And look at that you may not sin. It turns out that Phobos alone is not enough to prevent you from sinning. You actually need to go from a place of Phobos to awe and respect, so that then you can get to a place that you may not sin. Just think of it within a simple, let's use a husband and wife. Why do you not want to sin against your husband or wife? Is it because you're afraid of them? Or is the healthy place because you actually respect them? You revere them. The people stood far off while Moses drew near to the thick cloud and darkness where Elohim was.
Just on that, if you take the position before that, the child position, so think in the marriage context of what Michael just said there with the husband and wife, but from the children's perspective, children often miss the mark or transgress the Torah of the house because they're actually in the Phobos place. See, does Phobos in and of itself mean you don't transgress? You remember in the parable of Shofar So Good, she destroyed my bride's shoes. It wasn't going to go well for her. She was living in a place of Phobos. Why did the shoes not get eaten now when she's in a place of learning awe and respect? You see, the outcome is that you will honor the Torah the more you grow and mature in this place.
And so even just on a really simple, practical level, we come into the covenant and we understand that there's sin and there's a Torah of the house, and we do our best not to, transgress the Torah. The point I'm trying to get at is that if you want to sin less and less, your fear of Elohim, your reverence of Elohim actually needs to grow and grow. And, very often in our spiritual childlike state, we go, do not sin, lest Elohim smite me. And then we end up sinning because we're focused on the very thing we're trying to avoid. And actually the biblical way is grow in reverence. And the outcome of that will be that you sin less and less. Very much like Yeshua says, don't clean the outside of the cup. Clean the inside, then the outside will be clean. It's the same thing being spoken of here. As we grow and mature and our desire lines up more and more with his, we will do things his way more and more as a simple outcome. And so again, this is why the self-condemning false humility place is spiritually crippling and actually keeping us in a childlike state. You're choosing to remain at the mountain essentially, rather than go through the wilderness and into the promised land.
And he's not wanting to be an Elohim that is administering. His desire isn't that he would administer obedience from a place of Phobos or Hatat. Imagine if just Well, it's just all about being obedient to the Torah. Well, okay, in a childlike state, yeah, it's all about obey your parents, right? Think of the parables. But that's not his desire, is to stay and rule from that place. We have to be very careful that obedience is actually an outcome of maturing in reverence. But if you make obedience the goal and keep it in phobos, you just have people doing things out of fear, out of condemnation, out of all of those things. Now, he can get obedience anytime he wants. In fact, it's very clear, every knee shall bow when this is over. Every knee. So if this was just about obedience, he could have it right now. Why bother with the time domain? Why does he care that he doesn't desire to have an eternal kingdom that is based on phobos? He's actually wanting us to progress, and true obedience is actually an outcome. Phobos obedience is not the goal. And this is where, now obedience isn't the thing on the stand. The question is how you're going to get it. And are you going to get this through perfecting something? Are you going to get this through learning trust and arm respect? Or are you going to get it purely, I am Elohim, and I will smite you if you don't? So you can have this capricious Elohim, or we can start to learn an Elohim of love. But this place of reverence and trust must be overcome. It must be understood so that we can mature in this place that can maybe head and be a part of his desire.
Now, once phobos was used as the foundation, we get this passage, and everyone wonders why it was a good thing that let's just read it. Deuteronomy 18:15 through to 18. Yah your Elohim will raise up for you a prophet like me from among you, from your brothers. It is to him you shall listen. Just as you desired of Yah your Elohim at Horeb on the day of the assembly, when you said, let me not hear the voice of Yah my Elohim or see this great fire anymore, lest I die. And Yah said to me, they are right in what they have spoken. I will raise up for them a prophet like you from among their brothers, and I will put my words in his mouth, and he shall speak to them all that I command him. Quite often people ask, well, how was them asking for a mediator a good thing? And we understand, we've got the beauty of hindsight that this is actually a prophecy of Messiah, the mediator. We've put here Moshe is the shadow picture of Messiah, the mediator of a renewed covenant. And people go, well, how was this a good thing that they were afraid? And when you understand this journey, that you need to be in a place of phobos to then mature into a place of reverence, what the scripture is telling you, to help us go from terror to reverence, you need a mediator. Curtis used the parable of shofar so good. What did shofar need to help her grow into a place of reverence? Who did she need to show her the way to be pleasing to the master, to go from a place of phobos to reverence, to ultimately being part of truly of the family and being fully trusted? Well, she had someone that had gone before her. In Shofar's case, MJ was the mediator between Shofar and Curtis. In this example, Moshe was the mediator between the people and Elohim. This then being a shadow picture to Messiah being the mediator between us and the Father. To go from this place, if you're in a fearful place, how do you learn trust? Think of the dog in the proverbial trap. How does it come out of that? Does it do it by itself? No, it's too afraid. And so we see that actually to go from terror to reverence, mediatorship is required, discipleship, those that have gone before us. And this is why Yah says they are right in what they've spoken. The people knew they can't draw near to Elohim. They're too afraid. Moshe, you go so that we can learn to trust again.
Does the journey of reverence require the mediator. In the great spiritual picture, yes, Messiah, he is our mediator before all of this. But in the physical shadow picture, the creation is screaming it. So think of the children within the sibling dynamic, even the dynamic of mom to father. You know, you've heard the old statement, wait till your father gets home. You know, at that point, the child needs a mediator. There's you think of in the siblings, you know, the youngest, the middleborn, and the oldest and whatnot. And often this whole dynamic, and of course, one of the greatest things we never think about what Messiah did as a part of being our mediator was he came and demonstrated in the physical time domain this need or this essence of discipleship with his people. He spent the most time actually demonstrating the mediator component in the physical. In his time here on earth was devoted to that mediator, that discipleship aspect, which of course was pointing to the weightier matter of the mediator regarding this whole time domain, and of course our journey of reverence while we transgress in it. While we learn reverence, we are transgressors. We are sinners. This is why we can't make this claim. We are without sin. In fact, the warnings is indeed the darkness is literally overtaken us when we sit in such a delusion. We are actually in a place where not only we need the mediator, we need to overcome, and we need reverence to grow and mature in us as a part of that. And so this whole journey is about going through this. And of course, we have the mediator covering us, paid in price by his blood on the ancient Tav. Well, this process is occurring. And because of that, we can now have courage to go before the throne because of Messiah. Not because of our so-called works and phobos or ticking boxes and doing all of this kind of stuff. It's literally because we can now boldly go. And this is what Paul, the Apostle Paul, was actually trying to get across. We can boldly go now because of this position, not because we're not still struggling learning this reverence position, but because of him, we can approach now the throne. And this is an incredible picture for us to understand, but we don't believe truly unless we get this understanding of fear correct, as it's laid out in the Hebrew and the Greek, that we will even understand those instructions. We could take those instructions in the English, and I've seen this happen in religious environments, where I boldly go now before the throne, and actually it completely lacks reverence. They're actually trampling the blood of Messiah. Like it's now, there's no reverence in it. I go now and act however I want. And I'll do it on the Sabbath and I'll do it on the appointed times because my emotions trump everything. And that's a momentary delusion. They don't trump everything. That's his mercy being applied to us when we're in that state. And as we grow and mature, we start to realize that, man, I look back on my walk, I'm sure Michael does, and goes, there's a little bit of mercy that was required to get us to this place. Would that be fair, Michael? Did you need any mercy to get here?
Yeah, and then some.
Yeah. And I think everyone can relate to that. You know, as we go through this, we need to truly appreciate this the way he's wanting us to understand it, so that we don't get back to the place of the lack of reverence, which I've unfortunately seen on both sides of the river. And so we don't want to be a people that are doing that anymore, not to each other, not on his appointed times, not approaching the throne without a sense of mature reverence and all these sorts of things, because this is going to a certain place that's all going to link into his desire, which we're going to be looking at in a lot more detail in next year.
And to take that, you know, that he has a desire, we made the point that, you know, his desire is to have a bridal governance. And this passage is telling you one of the key functions of that bridal governance. Because think about the millennial reign. There's going to be some survivors of the wrath. Do you think they're going to be in a place of terror And what will be the job of the bride? I believe the bride will be doing some kind of mediatorship to help the children go from this place of terror to a place of reverence. Now, we've been prophesied that eventually that reverence will be lost yet again. It's the same pattern over and over. Reverence being lost, bring it back to Phobos, teach them reverence, may something grow out of it. This is the pattern that's being given to us.
When Messiah says, "Come follow me," he demonstrated a mediator role as a part of when he was here, and then obviously to the weightiest of matters. Well, if his bridal governance is following him, and one of the reasons for his scepter and how his ruling kingdom will work is she will now come follow me. She will be in a mediator position with the people of earth to finish this final raising of the eternal family. And so you're seeing this whole progression. So come follow me is just not a statement of Rabbi to the Talmidim. That's indeed a shadow picture instruction, but there's a way weightier matter of what he was actually saying, come follow me. And this is going to a big, big picture.
This is one of my favorite passages. Proverbs 1:5-7. Let the wise hear an increase in learning, and the one who understands obtain guidance. This is discipleship language. This is those that claim to be wise will go and seek counsel. Why? To understand a proverb and a saying, the words of their wise and their riddles. Now, what's really interesting, the word proverb in the Hebrew is the word mashal. Now, the word mashal can also mean a parable. And in fact, when Yeshua says that he was in the Gospels, it says that Yeshua was fulfilling Psalm 72, that he utters riddles of old in the parables and so forth. When you trace that back to the Psalms, it takes you to this word mashal. Now, what's really fascinating is that Yeshua plainly said that the secrets of the reign from heaven, the kingdom from heaven, are found within the parables. And so what King Solomon is saying here is essentially, if you claim to be wise, you will obtain wise counsel. You will seek guidance. Why? To understand the parables in which the secrets of the reign of the heavens are included in. Why would Yeshua pattern this very principle of obtaining guidance, of discipleship, to have eyes to see and ears to hear the parables? And then Solomon goes on, look at this, the fear of Yah is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. Simply said, not only is discipleship the foundation of understanding the parables and thus the kingdom from heaven, but so is the fear of Yah. If you do not have the fear and the reverence of Elohim, you will not understand kingdom principles. And if you do not understand kingdom principles, you cannot be trusted by the king. That's the simplicity, but also the severity of what this short passage is saying.
And it's very interesting because the outcome of this is fools despise wisdom and instruction. Essentially what it's saying is that they will despise discipleship in the parables, the very thing that's giving them these things, these understanding of the kingdom matters, the things being revealed of the kingdom. And it's why Messiah spoke in parables. Well, the ones that are lacking this, that it's not, they're just fools. They're despising the wisdom and the instruction that comes from the parables, the riddles.
And the reason is something is missing. The fear, because Solomon says it's the beginning. Fear is literally the foundation to this. Again, why? There's a lot of knowledge out there, but there's not a lot of wisdom and not a lot of reverence.
The fear of Yah is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is insight, the Yareh. The fear. So this place of getting the foundation right, the reset, the reboot, is the beginning of a journey. And again, we see it right back with the Exodus. We see it right back. We see it back before that with the flood judgment. We see this back to the garden. And so we're constantly going through these various resets and establishment of getting the fear in place in order to do the reverent journey, in order to take this to his desire. And so wisdom, it's a precious thing. This pearl of great price, the hidden manna, all of these examples that we see in Scripture, when we seek these out, if we are taking away the journey and we just focused on the what of our faith, obedience for obedience sake, this actually can lead us away from reverence and the why. And this is why Michael and I in the teachings and what we've done over the years is to go, yes, the whats are there, and they will be a part of his kingdom journey and things that we need to understand. But what he's wanting to get us to is to mature in reverence, that we may understand the why, because it is in the why that we will actually learn true reverence. We will start to grow. And it's never been about obedience for obedience sake, any more than it would be for parents raising their children. No loving parents truly just want to operate their children based on phobos or hatat, that they just live in fear. And the only reason why they listen to mom and dad is because they're so scared to what will happen to them if they don't. And to make our Elohim that, and to keep him there, is a childlike position. We must grow and mature, and to know that it has never been about just that. It is about growing into a much different and healthier and balanced place. And this is forged. The maturity of fear is forged in discipleship.
The fear of Yah, Proverbs 8:13, is the hatred of evil. Pride and arrogance and the way of evil and perverted speech I hate. And so we see here that an outcome of actually having godly reverence is, the outcome of it is that you will hate evil. If your desire lines up with his, what will also line up is what you do not desire will not be what he doesn't desire. But look at this. The outcome of the fear of Yah is that you will begin to hate perverted speech. This kind of made us think of Nathaniel and the 144,000. There's this interesting statement said about both these groups, that no guile or falsehood was found in their mouths. Now, the mouth speaks from the overflow of the heart. Whatever's written on your heart will eventually pour forth in your speech and actions. And here we're actually seeing a key characteristic of Nathaniel and the 144,000. They have the fear and reverence of Elohim. And that is what is producing the fruit of no guile and falsehood being in their mouth, because it's not in their heart. Their hearts are aligned with Elohim. And the outcome of that is that you will hate evil. The outcome of that is that you will not have perverted speech.
And perverted speech here is not, again, that that childlike Christian mindset, where you're speaking dirty or using foul language and all that kind of stuff. The perverted speech here, although the English doesn't capture it, is referencing something much deeper. And so this gets to covenant matters of the renewed covenant, and having that renewed on the heart. So out of the heart, the mouth speaketh. Well, we're relating to things like the third of the covenant matter, thou shalt not take his name in vain. In other words, that what's coming out, thou shalt not bear false witness. against a brother and whatnot. Like these are things that start to happen when the covenant is not on the heart. If we reduce this just to our, ugly fallen state and just make this about, well, don't swear, you're going to completely miss what this is actually on about. It is truly something that is coming from a covenant position. And that's why he hates it, because it's not on her heart. And if his desire is to have something on our heart, this is a big deal. And if we could just do it by making sure I don't swear or I don't say a dirty joke and suddenly I'm fine with the Father, if you're kept in that childlike place, we could actually miss where this was really supposed to go. And that was actually a covenant being written on our heart and what that truly means.
Reverence, not phobos, reverence brings boldness. Job 4:6. Now, this is Eliphaz, one of Job's so-called three friends, actually accusing Job of something. And he says, "Is not your fear of Elohim, your confidence, and the integrity of your ways your hope?" What Eliphaz is accusing Job of is that he's saying, it's not Elohim that's your confidence or your hope. It's you. You're putting your faith or your trust and your confidence in your fear of Elohim, or how he says you're putting your faith in your own integrity. Now, what's ironic about this is that what you're actually seeing here is Eliphaz projecting onto Job and accusing him of the very thing he's guilty of. But what's really interesting is that Job was in a better place than his three friends, but Job still had some issues to contend with. And we see, Elihu, the fourth chap, bring this up to the surface. But we know that Job was in a better place than his three so-called friends because Yah said so towards the end of the story of Job, to the point that Yah's like, you need to ask Job to pray for you. You need his help. But you see here that Job is being accused of something and projecting. But what's really interesting is that there's this, what you're seeing is that actually, if you have a fear of Elohim, if you have a reverence, it should actually bring about confidence and boldness in your life. To use an analogy, husband's wife, in a very functional, healthy marriage, the bride will have great confidence to come before. Again, think of the bride saying to the kids, you wait till your dad comes home. Do you think she has boldness and confidence to come before her husband in that moment? Yes. Why? There's reverence, there's trust in the picture. But you see Job being accused by Eliphaz of trusting in self. And think of it this way, Job was more mature. And Job's maturity and fear of Elohim actually gave him confidence. Now, Eliphaz, being less mature, is viewing that and going, you're putting trust in self. He's actually not able to understand the dynamics between Job and Elohim.
His accusation, being a projection, is because he can only see it from the place that he's at. So he's making the accusation, but he's not in Job's place. Now, Job, most certainly had some self-righteous issues that were being dealt with here as a part of being offered up before Hasatan. But make no mistake about it, a lot of these things, and we'll see it in the religious environment all the time, people will only see it from I would do that, so therefore you must be. Or I think this, so therefore you must be. And it's like, no, the brother or sister before you might be in a greater level of reverence. And so they're doing something, but not the reason you would. And this is why when we get into a place of a works-based mentality, and that's all it is, the what's, and we don't get the why, then suddenly we can gain a false sense of security as such, because, I'm doing the what's, I'm doing the works. I'm going to Sunday going to church every Sunday, or I'm going and doing my Sabbath gathering, or I'm going and I'm ticking my, Shabbat box, or I'm ticking my annual appointed times. And then suddenly this can all be done, not from a reverence position. And so I've seen people, and they're, you can take a brother and a sister, two brothers, two sisters, and you can stick them at a appointed time, an annual appointed time, and I can most assuredly tell you they're there for two different reasons, as to where their maturity lies. And one may still be ticking a box and in that full boss state, and the other is truly there. It's got nothing to do with that. It is absolutely a reverence position. And they can both be at the same appointed time. I can tell you which one has the capacity for doing violence to that appointed time. It's not the one that's there for the reverent reason. It's the one there that's ticking a box. And so whenever you see bad behavior, especially occurring at the Moedim, in the sense of doing violence to their brothers and sisters, when you see that happening, it is most assuredly coming from a place where reverence has not yet been established. And they're chewing the shoes, if you will, of the Moedim. And so we need to grow past this so that we start to enjoy our appointed times together more and more. Reverence, our reverence and intimacy connected. Ooh. But you are doing away with the fear of Elohim and hindering meditation before him. So where does he go? Michael, he's just going on and on and on here. Eliphaz has just continued on, and he's going, you're doing away with what?
Well, Eliphaz is upping the ante, so to speak, and he's now saying that your prayers, you're hindering your own prayer life, Job. Right? That's the accusation. Because of what you're doing, Job, you're actually doing away with the fear. You're not reverent, and your prayer life is being affected as a result. Because remember that Job was coming before Elohim and actually doing a Matthew 18 with Elohim. He was venting. He was being real with Elohim. Right? Yes, he was having a bit of a pity party, and understandably so, but Job was actually being real and saying he was being frank with Elohim. He was doing, the come, let us reason together, get it out of your chest. And Job being real with Elohim, Job's friend is saying, you're not being reverent and you're hindering your prayer life. And so, but Job was able to speak this way, not only because he was real, but because we believe he was more intimate with Elohim than Job's three friends. Let's use the analogy of a family again. A husband can speak to his wife a particular way because of the intimacy that's there. But if the children were to speak to the mother in exactly the same way, how do you think the husband and the wife would react? Whoa, 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 whoa. Don't you speak to her like that. You are not to speak to her like that. I can speak to her like that. We have a intimate connection, but you're not there. And so again, you see Eliphaz projecting on Job. Job is just being real with Elohim. And the point we're trying to say is that with intimacy, when there's a relationship established, you can actually go deeper and be more frank and say things in a certain way that someone less mature may go, oh, like I can speak to my wife in a certain way. But if the average person spoke to her that way, no, that would not be on. It would actually be disrespectful.
We don't have time to delve deep into this, but it actually links into aspects of accuser of the brethren. It actually comes from a place of self-projection onto others. And so you get into this whole accuser of the brethren aspect of what's going on. And it's interesting how we don't actually link this to the misplaced reality of not being in a reverent position. So those who have not grown in reverency are much more likely to be used in accuser of the brethren capacity, whether that's just full out delusion and deception, or whether it just be subtle misrepresentation position to even bearing false witness against a brother or sister. So these are things, again, we don't have time to go into in this series, but there's a great link here into the accuser of the brethren if fear is not progressed and matured.
Reverence produces true worship. So this is where we get to the Greek word proskuneo, which literally means to bow down as an expression of this reverence. This is the book of Hebrews speaking of Messiah. It says, and again, when he brings the firstborn into the world, he says, let all the angels worship him. Now, depending on your English translation, some may say worship, some may say to do reverence. And so what we're seeing here is that because the angels have a reverence of Elohim, the outward expression of that, the outcome of that is that they bow down and worship before him. And the reason they do that is the reverence usually can come from rank, profound reverence. And the point is that this is an outcome of someone's heart condition. And this is not the only place that we see this word. We see this with the Magi coming before Messiah the infant and going into the house. They saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they fell down, and look at this, they worshipped him. Then opening their treasures, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And so we see that the outcome of reverence is worship. And so this is when, the fear of Elohim will determine whether your worship is true or whether it's false, whether it's hypocritical. Because we're told in scripture, you worship him in vain. You pray, you give him praises, but keep your heart far from him. Now, we're being given here what true worship is, the outcome of reverence. But just because you're falling down in homage doesn't mean that it's actually coming from the heart. But with the angels, it is. With the Magi, it is. In fact, you see this in Revelation. He said with a loud voice, fear Elohim, phobeo. So this is actually a form of the word phobos. So look at what comes first. Phobos first, then give him glory, because the hour of his judgment has come, and worship him, or proskuneo, him who made heaven, earth, and the sea, and the springs of water. Notice the order that these are given in. You have to have the foundation of phobos, and if it goes past a place of reverence, hence giving him glory, the outcome of that will be true worship. Now, go on.
Reverence produces true worship. What's very important here is it doesn't say and praise him. This isn't about singing music or those sorts of things. That can be an expression within the worship context. This is actually those that come and worship him who made heaven and earth. So they're looking at something, they're a part of his desire now at this point, and it's from a reverent position. So the actual expression of the worship here is the place that they have got to, and how that's expressing itself in all forms. And in essence, the more we mature in reverence, the more our worship or our being actually pleases him. And so in essence, we become the worship. And it's the outcome of the reverence. Now, will that translate into praise, which is done in a proper context where it's not a golden calf, but it's actually a true reverent expression or a fruit of something? Most certainly. But you can try and counterfeit this, and let's make it all about the music, or let's make it, all about the teaching, or let's make it all about ticking our boxes or doing this. Or true reverence will produce a sweet smelling fragrance to him. These things will be an outcome, and in essence, our worship before him, not, trying to bow down 20 times a day, to try and make ourselves worthy. Our very being will actually worship him.
Now, why are we laboring this point of reverence produces true worship? Here's the question. What kind of reverence and fear is required of the bridal governance? Because as we've just seen, the servant angelic realm has reverence. They have reverence. As we've just seen in Revelation 14, the earth will fear Phobos Elohim and give him reverence. We're told that even after the resurrection of the two witnesses and the resurrection in general, that there will be those that see this and give glory to Elohim in heaven. They're being brought to this place of reverence. But yet they're not the bride. The angelic servant realm, they are not the bride, yet they have reverence. And so now
they
we
lose that reverence, Michael. This is a very important part. Even at that level of the servant realm, if they lose it, they're out.
Yeah. And this is why we made the statement right at the start of the teaching. There's phobos, there's reverence, and then there's bridal. And this is the point we're trying to get to, that this is how deep does this reverence and fear of Elohim really go? It's not one dimensional. Far from it. It's a journey at various stages, because what we're seeing in scripture, the bride's going to have a reverence that goes beyond that of the angelic realm.
And this is why pride plays a huge part in this, and why it was linked to the leaven of the Pharisees in such a incredible way, because pride will usurp reverence. And so you can tick all the boxes, you can have all the knowledge, you can do all of these things, but pride will bring violence, and it will usurp true reverence. And so this is when that was seen in the angelic realm. Of course, we had the birth of Hasatan, and of course, the third of the servantly realm will be will partake ultimately in this before it's over. And what they truly lost was reverence. Again, this picture of something lost outside the time domain. And it will all start to make sense as to where it actually occurred and how it happened. Right ruling requires reverence. So the array here, the Elohim of Israel has spoken, the rock of Israel. So Messiah, this picture in 2 Samuel of Messiah here, has said to me, when one rules justly over men, ruling in the fear of Elohim, okay, the reverence of Elohim, not the phobos, not the chatat, the actual reverence of Elohim. He draws on them like the morning light, like the sun shining forth on a cloudless morning, like rain that makes grass to sprout from the earth. In other words, reverence is going to bring life. It's going to bring that which rules justly. You cannot do that from a position of atat. You cannot do it from phobos. You cannot do it with our general Western understanding of fear. It's actually their ruling in the reverence of Elohim. And this is the safest place for which anything can be governed. In fact, it goes on to say here, and this is why the cloudless mornings, the rains that make the grass sprout, it's pointing the sun shining. It's using the creation to say everything that brings forth life will actually come from truly having a healthy balance of reverence. So you mean the fear of Elohim brings forth life? This is the example that's being used here. It's actually linking, getting to this, to the bringing of life. The river, think river of life. Think how he's actually doing this from a ruling sense, that which his counsel is going to stand up and take order.
Yeah, the light will go forth from Zion, living waters. And what's beautiful about this passage, there's actually an ambiguity in the Hebrew that who's he that's dawning on them like the morning light, because you've got Elohim, or the one ruling justly, that's doing this. And we would say that actually both are correct. when you understand that it's Elohim in us, that we are shining his light, we are dispensing his living waters, you're actually getting a picture of the millennial reign here, of the bride acting. She is literally walking in the way of Elohim and shining his light.
It's no coincidence that the Hebrew is reverencing the feminine noun here. Not to our mind. This is an echad statement, and it's actually using it in the feminine noun sense for a reason. It's possibly pointing to that. What's going to come forth is an echad position that brings forth life. It's all over the scripture in relationship to it, but reverence has been established here. Reverence produces right ruling. The former governors were before me laid heavy burdens on the people. So they're laying heavy burdens on them, and took from them, from their daily ration, 40 shekels of silver. Even their servants lorded it over the people. But I did not do so because of the fear of Elohim. So what was happening in this whole picture is burdens are being laid, and even those serving from the right from me. So the governors, the servants, they're literally now lording over the people. Why? Because the reverence is missing. There's no fear of Elohim.
Nicolaitism, as spoken of by Revelation, this passage is telling you it comes from a lack of the fear of Elohim in the servant leadership. But notice here, now we're getting into the Hebrew is displaying some of the other Greek attributes that the Greek captures regarding character. Look at what Nehemiah is not doing because of his fear of Elohim. He's not fearing the people. He's fearing Yah, and as a result, his actions and his character are being affected by it. And this is one of the key attributes that the Greek picks up on with a separate word, but you're seeing it here in the Hebrew, which is wonderful. And when you take that on, rule your house with fear. This is speaking of servant leadership and the the requirements that are required of them. He must manage his own household well, with all dignity, keeping his children submissive. Now, depending on your English translation, it may say dignity, it may say piety, it may say reverence. And for if he does not know how to manage his own household, how will he care for Elohim's assembly? And so this is the Greek semnotes that is being displayed by what we've just read in Nehemiah. Because Nehemiah had the fear of Elohim, he did not rule and lord it over the people. And this is what what Paul is saying to Timothy, you must manage your household well with all reverence, with all dignity. Because you fear Yah, you will rule your household well. We see Paul elsewhere say, fathers, don't spite your children. Do not lord it over them to create spite and malice in your children. This is what's going on here, that look, if you do not have the fear of Elohim, you will not know how to manage your household in the shadow picture, let alone on the spiritual weightier matters.
And let's keep this in true context here regarding Prophet Nehemiah, because this is relating to Judah. See, they have a true understanding of what's going on here in the sense of the faith, the what's. This is not the issue. The issue was how they were ruling. So is it knowledge? Is it ticking boxes that make sure we don't become oppressors, which Nehemiah is having to deal with? Well, I can tell you, if this can happen within the house of Yehuda at the time, with that much knowledge and understanding, if it doesn't get to the right place, no amount of knowledge and box ticking is going to achieve this. And so, Nehemiah is addressing something that's make no mistake about it, it's the heart level.
And this is
at the Y level.
And we're asking this in the context of what kind of reverence will be required of the bridal governance. Notice these last couple of scriptures are to do with ruling and overseeing. Now think of the way overseeing and ruling a whole millennial reign, an eternal family.
Yeah, the semnotes here. All right, so a good witness demonstrates fear. Show yourself in all respects to be a model of good works, and in your teaching show integrity. The semnotes. Character related, reverence related, and in sound speech that cannot be condemned, so that an opponent may be put to shame, having nothing evil to say about us. So the witness now is actually coming from a healthy place of that witness operating in a mature fear. So you mean that us being in a mature, fearful position is actually going to become the witness that doesn't put Messiah to shame, the faith to shame, the body to shame. This is a big deal because it's going to come down to that character being defined by actually growing in the fear of Elohim and reference. I'm not sure if we can really say this right now in a lot of what I'm witnessing out in the body. What I've witnessed in myself over the years, what I've seen in others. You know, when he takes us through this and we look in the mirror and we go through these things, why we need to look at unleavened bread every day is because this is the place we can fall into. And we're not actually semnotes. We're not actually the characteristic that is the character that is showing and demonstrating reverence and honor. And so as a result of that, we honor, we dishonor, and take his name in vain, the very covenant given at Sinai, which was founded in Phobos or Hatat.
Reverent even in bondage? You mean I'm not off the hook now that I'm in bondage, Curtis? The Apostle Paul didn't think so. This is a beautiful passage because you get two usages of the words here. First of all, then I urge that supplications, prayers, intercessions, and thanksgiving be made for all people. That's not just the body there. It means all people. Look at this. For kings and all who are in high positions. That's Rome in that day, that are in high positions and ruling. Now, why does he say that? That we may lead a peaceful and quiet life. Look at this. Godly, eusebeia, reverent, and dignified, semnotes, again, this word that's come up, in every way. Dignified was the word used for ruling the household, for ruling the assembly. Paul is saying that you do not get to use your bondage as an excuse to not have the fear of Elohim. In fact, if you have the fear of Elohim, you will do this. You will seek, you will go about in a way. Again, it's this witness thing that's going on. You do not get to use your bondage of modern day Rome to not show godly fear, to not be reverent. And in fact, again, like if you feared Yah, you would understand that he put you in bondage and that that's for your own good. You would also understand that despite the monkey business of Rome, they're still created in his image.
In fact, they need to see our witness. And what we're seeing in social media, our homes, marriages, how we treat one another, are they seeing this? Is Rome seeing this? Because right now we're in Roman bondage. We're actually in bondage right now. Now we're on the precipice, on the Rubicon of being set free. But right now, this applies to us, and this is why we see it in the witness, in the Brit, and why it's recorded in First Timothy. Why we're seeing this instruction. This was the witness that was supposed to be had by the unbeliever, by those who had us in bondage. And somehow it doesn't apply to us anymore. The behavior that we are seeing just in the house, and this is why judgment will start first in the house of Elohim. It must, because this is the very thing. If it's not judged in us first, how does this witness go forth? And what witness do we really see? Let's be honest. in believers, are we seeing good social media behavior right now? Are we really seeing this in the body? Like, what witness is really being seen there by so-called believers right now? How about our marriages? How about in our workplaces? How about with our children? How easy has it become for us to point the finger now? And we don't see, maybe just like the Pharisees, the pride in our own house. And it's actually blocking our reverence. Michael and I both wish that we could just share information and let's tick our appointed time boxes and we're good. But we're unfortunately the ones that have to point out that that's not what makes us good. None are good. Only Him. And no amount of our works, no amount of our knowledge is the thing that we're here to get and to understand. But what we've been addressing in today's teaching, and where we're going to finish with this today, is literally that if reverence doesn't come into this picture, it won't matter what you've done, what you know in this essence of the faith. It's going to be what we have become. And without reverence, without the fear of Elohim, this work does not get completed in us. It's heading somewhere. Let us not just reduce this to being afraid of something. Let us truly get to a place where our worship has come from a place of reverence. And guess what? It'll eventually happen. Obedience will take care of itself. But if obedience is the pursuit and not Messiah, we could get ourselves in big trouble. In fact, the Pharisees, it appears that they did. Well, Michael, we finish here. What is our fear of Elohim? So what's your and I's fear of Elohim?
And this is just the start of the journey. What is our fear? Are we in Phobos? Because if we are, okay, that's the foundation. We have mediatorship to help us get from Phobos to reverence. We've been given discipleship so that we can figure out what this reverence is. We've been given accountability in discipleship so that we can remain in that reverent place because of our fallen state. Sometimes we just need to be reminded, hey, remain reverent. Remember your fear of Elohim. But what we're saying is that Phobos and reverence alone is not enough for the bridal position. There will be a bridal position where that reverence has been perfected, that love has been perfected, and the outcome of that will be something called trust. But before we can even look at that, we have to ask this question: what is our fear of Elohim?
We have an Elohim that is not planning on running eternity based on Phobos, and he plans to do it on reverence. Then it beseeches us to understand this and to grow. We don't have an Elohim any more than a husband, a wife, parents, those who own animals. Do you really want to run your household on Phobos, on Atat? No. Why do we think our Creator would? Yes, it's a part of the necessary. The journey necessitates an aspect of this to be built upon. But let us grow now into that next stage. And so we'll look at that next week.
All right. Let's stop here for today. We'll do some Q&A once we've had a break. Amen.